We all know the Beatles were the biggest influence on people like Ozzy Osbourne, Gene Simmons, and Lemmy Kilmister, and the Beatles have been called many things, including pioneers, innovators, and icons. One thing they have rarely been called, however, is heavy metal. Still, that's exactly what John Lennon labeled the group's 1965 single Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride was slightly a new sound at the time. It was pretty heavy for then, if you go and look in the charts for what other music people were making. Lennon later argued, "It's a heavy record, and the drums are heavy too, that's why I like it." Indeed, the drum part, in particular, seemed to be Lennon's favorite ingredient on Ticket to Ride. During a 1980 interview with Playboy's David Sheff, Lennon referred to the track as one of the earliest heavy metal records made. Paul's contribution was the way Ringo played the drums. While Revolver is not heavy metal for 1966, it can be regarded as one of the first Proto-metal albums. Also, there were several songs on the White Album that were Proto-metal. Revolution, the single, was Proto-metal itself, but Helter Skelter was the Beatles at their heaviest, for sure. If any pop track is to be called the first metal song, then it's gotta be the Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter is a song written by Paul McCartney, credited to Lennon-McCartney, and recorded by the Beatles on their eponymous LP, The Beatles, better known as the White Album, a product of McCartney's deliberate effort to create a sound as loud and dirty as possible. The Conjurer's piece has been noted for both its proto-metal road and unique texture. It was one of several White Album compositions interpreted by Charles Manson as coded prophecies of a war to arise from racial tension between blacks and whites. According to Chris Thomas, who was present, the 18 July session was especially spirited. While Paul was doing his vocal, George Harrison had set fire to an ashtray and was running around the studio with it above his head, doing an Arthur Brown. Starr's recollection is less detailed but agrees in spirit. Helter Skelter was a track we did in total madness and hysterics in the studio. Sometimes you just had to shake out the jams. If Lennon's I Want You She's So Heavy, or the band's last studio effort, Abbey Road, came out today, it would be called progressive doom metal. Metallica's tour manager, Bobby Schneider, was playing a tape of Abbey Road on the band bus when the big guitar crescendo in I Want You She's So Heavy came on. Hetfield piped up, "Hey, what's that? That's pretty fucking hot." I said, "Man, that's the fucking Beatles," says Schneider. He'd never heard it before. James also said, I Want You She's So Heavy was heavier than anything his band ever did. Also, the first bands to use a drop D tuning were the Beatles in I Want You She's So Heavy and Led Zeppelin in Moby Dick, both released in 1969. In Revolution No. 9 of the White Album, the disturbing cacophony of cars honking, sinister voices, babies crying, men screaming in agony, mobs rioting, guns firing, twisted chamber music, it is hard to listen to, and there were no other bands that were recording music like this during the period of 1967 to 1969. Led Zeppelin didn't hit the shelves until January of 1969. High Tide's Sea Shanties was also released in 1969. Budgie didn't land until 1971 and Black Sabbath in 1970. As these bands are generally regarded as the creators of heavy metal, the next question was, were they influenced by the Beatles? The answer is definitely yes. Jimmy Page of the aforementioned Led Zeppelin described the influence of the Beatles in an interview with LedZeppelin.com. When the Rolling Stones first started, they were doing really good interpretations of Muddy Waters, songs, and all that jazz catalog. They weren't the only ones. Of course, you had the Beatles in Liverpool with Please Mr. Postman, and it really wasn't the same deal as what was going on down South London, but it got very popular and changed what was going on. It wasn't so much for me, their music, but the fact that they wrote their own songs, and all of a sudden they opened the door for any band that could write songs. I started doing studio work. That's the big change they made on the music scene. Tony Hill of High Tide said, everybody wanted to be the Beatles, and then the Stones, the president of a band writing its own material, had been set by them. They just covered for the sake of the audience. I bought a Gretsch guitar, the Jet Firebird, the Beatles influence. And Black Sabbath legend Ozzy Osbourne put it thusly in an interview with NY Rock. Shortly before I left school, the Beatles got popular and they were my first addiction. I could switch off, forget my surroundings and dive into the music. It was something magical, almost a spiritual experience for me. Of course, my dad hated it. Way back then, the Beatles were revolutionaries and their music was revolutionary music. You know, they were considered to be a bad influence because they gave the kids ideas The idea is to do something else with their lives than waste it in factories or become plumbers. For adults, it was a dangerous thing, but for us, they were heroes. NY Rock was baffled, stating, "It's a bit hard to imagine that Black Sabbath was inspired by the Beatles, but so it was." In 2004, Ozzy again mentioned the Beatles as a chief influence in interviews and told Guitar Center, "The biggest break in my life came when the Beatles hit. They totally sucked me in and I thought, that's my way out, my music." I used to fantasize, as all kids do, about Paul McCartney marrying my sister and all that crazy stuff. That set me off into music and my first gig ever at a fire station in my hometown. And if you need affirmation from the fathers of extreme metal, how about Corthan of Battery confessing, "I'm a big fan of the Beatles," to Online Panzer magazine in 2003, or Dave Mustaine of Megadeth telling Shockwaves magazine, "My roots are really Led Zeppelin and the Beatles." Tom Warrior of Celtic Frost telling H2CF, "My musical influences are of course, and correctly, Black Sabbath, but also and heavily, the Beatles." Or Abaddon of Venom hailing the artistic integrity of Paul McCartney. You know, Paul McCartney could have continued doing Beatles songs for the rest of his life, but he didn't do that. Wings sound quite different from the Beatles. It wasn't as commercially successful as the Beatles stuff, but what the hell. Even modern metal gods hail the lads from Liverpool. Michael Akerfield of Opeth said, "People call us a metal band, and I'm happy with that. Metal to me is a very wide term. It is not just 100% speed all the time. To me metal is raging from the Beatles onward." The psychedelia of the late 60s certainly was a huge influence on the development of heavy metal, and two of the landmark albums were Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Magical Mystery Tour. Jimi Hendrix and Cream, who were contemporaries of the Beatles, undeniably helped to create the signature guitar sound that would define the heavy metal genre. We need to remember that long before there was Long Since Dark, there was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Before there was a Black Album, there was a White Album. Before there was Century Media Records, there was Apple Records. Before there was Headbangers Ball, there was Hard Day's Night. Even the long hair, it started with the Beatles, Mop Tops. Anyway you cut it, the Fab Four's influence of the heaviest of music's genre is indelible and enduring. The Beatles had many styles, and that's one thing that truly is downright awesome about them. It's just too bad that there are not enough music groups out there today that can play all sorts of styles instead of just sticking to one style through and through. Perhaps they did invent heavy metal, or perhaps they just inspired many future heavy metal artists, just as they inspired so many different styles of music artists more than most music artists of the past. One thing is for sure, they did inspire music of the future.
Hello.
That was Ringo, folks.
Well, what can I say?
And goodbye from all of us.
Well, this is Ringo. Everyone seems to have said everything here, so I'll just sign off by saying cheerio and best of luck from the Beatles.